do I become more creative? How do you become more creative? And how do you get more creativity out of the people around you? We just surveyed tens of thousands of people around the world, all walks of life, asking them about creativity. And the top two answers that people had about creativity, the top two answers, loud and clear, were those two. How do I get more creativity out of myself? And how do I get more creativity out of my teams? And I think most of us know when the world is changing, when our environment is changing, when situations, circumstances, problems, challenges are changing, it's when we need creativity the most. We're solving problems that we haven't had to solve before. Right now, I think we're in the middle of one of those moments, aren't we? Where we need to be able to solve problems we've never solved before. So we need this. So those two questions, how do I get more creativity out of myself, and how do I get more creativity out of the people around me? There was one other thing that just jumped out of the survey, and it was this. I have too many limits, too many constraints, too many boundaries, too many constrictions, too many limits. I have too much stuff going on to be as creative as I could be. And it forced us to step back and look at all the research we've been doing for my book on this topic. And I want to help you with the answer to those three things put together with this story. We just finished an entrepreneur camp with a group of high school kids, a group of teenagers, mostly 13, 14, 15-year-olds. And it was an 8-week program, and it was 2 hours a day, once a week for 8 weeks. So a total of 16 hours, right? And we started this entrepreneur adventure experience on day one, the 2-hour class, if you will. And I wouldn't really call it a class. It's more of an experience. That 2 hours, in the middle of that time, we gave the kids a challenge. The challenge was very simple. The challenge was make $125 profit in the next 60 minutes. Now, how do I get more creativity out of myself and out of the people around me? But at the same time, I've got all these constrictions, all these limits, all these limitations, all these restrictions. We gave these kids several extreme limitations, several extreme restrictions, several extreme components that boxed them in. I mean, number one is you only have an hour. Number two is we gave them one thing to sell, not multiple things. We didn't say sell whatever you want. We gave them one thing to sell, and they had to make, in an hour, they had to make $125 profit. Now, did they say, I can't do it with these restrictions? No. Were they thinking that? I think maybe, perhaps. But see, sometimes the thing that pulls creativity out of us is to embrace a few limitations, embrace a few restrictions, embrace a few, maybe even create one. Maybe even create one where it doesn't exist. Elon Musk loved to ask the question, how do I accomplish a 10-year goal in 6 months? I'm going to invite you to a challenge, to pick one of the things in your world that needs some creativity. Maybe it's repairing or rebuilding or strengthening some relationship. And maybe your question is, if I could only interact with that person for a few minutes every single day, or a few minutes once a week, or a few minutes once a month, if I could only have a very finite amount of time to interact with that person, what do I do in that time that possibly could accomplish what I'm trying to accomplish? Right? It's that 10-year, 6-month question. It's that, how do I make $125 profit? Not in the next week, not in the next month, not eventually, but how do I do it in an hour? And for these kids, it was an hour. It was a very limited. It was one product, and they also couldn't leave the room. It was an entrepreneur camp where we were responsible for them. They couldn't go somewhere. There were a whole bunch of things they couldn't do. Maybe the people that might be the perfect buyers weren't available in that hour. Maybe the perfect buyers, maybe they knew some of them personally, but they couldn't get in touch with them in that hour, with what they had in that hour for means of communication. Give yourself a limit. How do I get more creativity out of myself and my teams? Quite often it's the opposite of that third loud and clear response we heard on this assessment, on this survey. Quite often it's embracing a limit or even creating a limit. I want to challenge you, I want to encourage you to pick some piece of your life and say, you know what? If I only had a few minutes, maybe a few minutes a day to interact with one of my kids. If I only had this weekend, if I only had this Saturday morning, if I only had one date night a week or a month with my significant other, with my spouse or significant other, how do I make that? How do I embrace that limit? How do I embrace that constraint to help be a catalyst, to help facilitate creativity in my world? Maybe it's saying, okay, if I have to solve this problem, but I can only use the resources I've currently got, if I can only use the finances I've got, if I can only use the budget I've got, if I can only use the tools right here, if I can only work with the team I have, if we can only attack this problem with a very limited, maybe it's time frame, maybe it's resources, but embrace a limit and practice letting that facilitate, letting that be the catalyst to get more creativity out of you and out of your teams.